The Worse Witch and the Wishing Star. Chapter 14. Miss Hardbrim decided that each class should come up with ideas for the competition and select the best one with the aid of their form mistress, the chosen act to be handed into the staff room. Miss Hardbrim and Miss Cackle would then consider all the suggestions carefully and post the winner on the downstairs notice board at the end of the week. Miss Drill's class was bursting with ideas, and Enid's dance troupe was very popular with her classmates, but totally unpopular with Miss Drill, who knew that it wouldn't get past Miss Hardbrim's disapproving eye. In the end, Form 4 voted for Ethel's chanting choir when Miss Drill said that perhaps they could incorporate a small amount of tap dancing at the same time.
"I just know they'll choose my idea," gloated Ethel, passing Mildred in the corridor as they both started out on their nightly round of lantern lighting. "The Grand Wizard's mad about choral singing, so that's a start. And I've got such a superb voice. My singing tutor told me that I'm impossible to teach because I'm already at such a high standard. Have you got something else in your bag, Mildred? It looks absolutely stuffed."
"Nope," said Mildred briskly, hastening down the shadowy corridor before Ethel could investigate further. "Better get on, or it'll be dark before we're finished."
"It's not fair,"
yelled Ethel, stomping into the classroom the next morning after breakfast.
"They didn't choose my idea. I can't believe it."
Form 4 were busy gathering up their gym kit, ready to set off for a training session, and everyone looked up surprised.
"How do you know, Ethel?"
asked Drusilla.
"I've just seen it on the notice board," snarled Ethel. "They've chosen Form 5 to do a broomstick ballet called The Joy of Flying. Ugh, what a stupid idea. It is not exactly original anyway."
Despite Ethel's endless sneeriness towards her, Mildred couldn't help feeling quite sorry for Ethel. It was so important to her, being first and best at all costs, and Mildred could see how upset she was to not have the chance to win such an important competition. Miss Drill strode into the classroom wearing yet another vibrant outfit. This one was a dress composed of green lace cobwebs with a short black and green striped jacket, purple starry stockings, and painted cowboy boots. "What's the matter, Ethel?" she asked sternly. "I could hear your voice halfway down the corridor."
"I'm sorry, Miss Drill," said Ethel, trying to sound humble. "I was just disappointed that our class hadn't been chosen."
"We're all disappointed, Ethel," said Miss Drill reprovingly. "Aren't we, girls? But you mustn't be a bad loser, Ethel. Everyone knows that losing graciously is just as important as winning in any competition. There are some excellent dancers in Form 5, and that particular class also has some of the best flyers. Yes, Ethel, I know you are one of the best in this class, but it has been decided, and you'll just have to accept that Form 5 simply came up with the best idea of all. Now then, girls, gather up your kit and hurry down to the cloakroom to change, and you can do a spot of broomstick gymnastics to take your mind off your little disappointment. Think of it this way, girls. At least you can get on with your usual studies and tasks, while Form 5 does all the hard work. Then all you'll have to do is cheer them on with the rest of the school and hope they win. Sounds like rather good news if you ask me." Chapter 15. It sounded brilliant news to Mildred, who was now free to concentrate on her routine of lantern lighting and dousing, plus sneaking Star in and out and working extra hard at her lessons so that she didn't draw any attention to herself. Everything was going so smoothly that she began to wonder if the wishing star had also been a lucky star, making things start to go right all the time. Even Tabby had calmed down gradually as the days passed. It wasn't long before he realised that Star was no threat at all. And one day, when Mildred came up to her room after lessons, she found them both asleep in the hodel under her bed.
The playground was often so misty first thing that you couldn't see the gates until you were a few feet away, which made the early dog walk much easier. One morning, when the mist was so thick that it provided perfect cover, Mildred took Star a little further into the pine forest and started to teach him a few tricks on the broomstick. He was a natural, unafraid, trusting, and desperate to please his rescuer, and Mildred found that he would, and could, do anything she asked. "Wow!" thought Mildred, as she swerved in and out of the trees with Star leaning into the corners like a pillion rider on a motorbike. "If only we could have dogs on our brooms, I'd be the school champion. Even the best cats can't do anything much except sit there." Every time it was misty, which was most mornings at that time of year, Mildred taught Star some more tricks. He also came up with a few himself, such as standing on his head and doing a backflip in mid-air that took him above the broom and over the side, with Mildred zooming underneath to catch him. Mildred invented a new trick where Star did the usual backflip, with Mildred zooming underneath him. However, this time they started 30 feet up and did several backflip catches, descending very fast so that it looked quite graceful, like a tumbling waterfall. Mildred had never had so much fun on a broomstick before. After a few weeks of morning Star training, Mildred became so enthusiastic that she began helping him to practice some of the more complicated routines in her room. At first, she was a little worried that Tabby would be jealous, but he didn't mind at all. He absolutely hated broomstick flying and couldn't care less about Mildred training anyone else, as long as he still had his place on her pillow at night and lots of cuddles when she was sitting in bed reading. Star tactfully slept at the end of the bed on Mildred's feet or curled up into the back of her knees, and Tabby often sneaked under the covers into Mildred's arms, so that she sometimes woke up almost wearing the two of them. On cold nights, Mildred slept better than she had ever done, wrapped in her pets like a furry dressing gown. She'd even got used to the clunking bat flap, just as Maud had said she would. Mildred hardly saw Maud and Enid at all during the first few weeks. They often called for her, but she was usually off lantern lighting in the evening when they all had a spare moment. And by the time she was back from dousing the candles in the morning, they only had a few minutes for a quick hello before they all dashed off to breakfast. One morning, Mildred had just zipped Star back into the hovel when there was a knock at the door. "Who is it?" asked Mildred nervously. The door burst open, and there stood Maud and Enid, dressed and ready for the day, holding their broomsticks. "Surprise!" said Maud. "We're coming to help you, so we can all have half an hour together." "Gosh, Mill!" said Enid, who was holding a large jug and a pair of kitchen scissors. "How on earth do you do this every morning and stay so cheerful?" "I've sort of got used to it," said Mildred, glancing at the bag. "Look, don't worry about me. I'll just nip round on my own. I'll be back in a tick, and then we can catch up over breakfast." "Don't you like us any more, Mill?" asked Maud, sounding really hurt. "You never ask us into your room these days. Have we done something to upset you?" "Maud's right," said Enid. "It feels as if you're avoiding us both. We haven't had a proper conversation with you since the first day of term." Mildred looked desperately at her two friends, longing to tell them, but knowing they would be horrified. She had been having such fun with Star, and it had all been so easy, taking him out on lantern duty and hiding him under the bed. She thought of his sweet, scruffy face gazing at her, and his warmth during the long, freezing nights, and didn't want to risk losing him. "Don't be daft," said Mildred. "Of course I'm not avoiding either of you. I've just been busy. But I really will be quicker on my own, and—" "Well, we're coming with you, whether you like it or not," said Maud. "Enid's got to get some foliage for her duty as flower monitor. Haven't you, Enid?" "That's right," said Enid. "So let's go." Mildred trailed miserably down the corridors, expertly flipping open the lantern flaps and putting out the candles, followed along by her broomstick and her two friends, and soon they had reached the school gates. "You really are good at this, Millie," said Maud, as Mildred hovered expertly up and over the gateposts, deftly extinguishing the last two lanterns on the way. They all hovered down and landed on the grass. Mildred led everyone out of sight along the outside of the wall and into the edge of the forest. "Gosh, Mildred," said Enid, "what on earth have you got in that bag?" Star, who was looking forward to his morning runabout and broomstick fun, was wagging his tail and bustling, making the bag and broomstick jerk about madly. Maud and Enid stared at the bag in amazement. "This is going to surprise you both," said Mildred, "but it isn't as bad as it looks." She unzipped the holdall and Star leapt out like a jack-in-the-box. He was delighted to meet Mildred's friends, jumping up to lick their faces and then setting off in mad circles through the trees, overjoyed to be out after his long night in Mildred's room. Maud and Enid stood with their mouths open, stunned. "So this is why you've been avoiding us," gasped Maud. "Oh, Mildred, Miss Hardbroom will go insane if she finds out. And you've been doing so well this term. What on earth possessed you? Where did you get him from?" "Well, I didn't get him from anywhere," said Mildred, resting on the back of her hovering broom. "He got me. Anyway, it's your fault, Maudie. You told me to wish on that shooting star, and I wished for a dog. And there he was the next day outside the gates. I couldn't send back a wish come true, could I? It wouldn't be right. And he's so clever. He can do hundreds of tricks. Look, I'll show you." She called him over and patted the back of the broom. "Oh, come on, you two," said Mildred. "Stop being so grumpy. Just sit there on your brooms and I'll show you all the things he can do. You'll soon see why I had to keep him." Chapter 16. The three friends made their way back through the silent morning corridors with Star zipped neatly into his holdall and Enid carrying the jug, now full of pine-cone branches and jolly twigs with red berries to brighten up the grey stone classroom. They hurried into Mildred's room and closed the door behind them. Mildred opened the holdall and Star immediately leapt out and dived under the bed. "I don't know what Einstein's going to say when he wakes up in the spring," laughed Mildred. "Well then, what do you think of him?" "He's incredible, Mildred," said Maud. "And you're incredible with him. I've never seen you fly like that." "He's like part of you," said Enid. "Like another arm or leg. I can see why you're crazy about him. Not that it makes things easier. HB will still go mad when she finds out." "If she finds out," said Mildred. "And we aren't telling anyone, are we?" "Oh, of course not," said Maud. "Anyway, you've done brilliantly so far. Even your best friends didn't suspect a thing. So maybe you'll be able to hide him until the end of term. Tell you what, let's all go and watch Form 5 rehearsing their broomstick ballet at lunchtime. They're doing the first dress rehearsal in the Great Hall. It's supposed to be fantastic." "Oh, that would be so nice," said Mildred, feeling a wave of relief that her two best friends were in on her secret. "It'll be great if we win, especially as Form 5 are doing all the hard work. At least there's no way I can mess up someone else's broomstick display." They all laughed, remembering the now legendary Halloween, when they were first years and Ethel had spitefully lent Mildred a broom with a spell on it, which had wrecked the display. Everything had turned out well in the end, but Mildred still had nightmares about it. The broomstick ballet was fantastic. Miss Hardbroom had taken charge of the project with the help of Miss Bad, who was providing a rousing piano accompaniment, and Miss Mould, the art mistress, who had designed some wonderful flowing costumes for the 4 aerial ballerinas. Each dancer represented a different aspect of night flying. There was an owl dancer in magnificent wings and a headdress made from hand-sewn fluttering silk feathers, 2 dancers draped in midnight blue robes, sewn with star-shaped sequins, and the principal dancer, who was bedecked in silver and blue to represent moonlight. The dancers were set against a beautiful deep blue backdrop with a huge white moon and stars picked out in luminous paint which glowed magically under the candelabras. Every class had worked tirelessly painting the backdrop and sewing on sequins and feathers so that the whole school felt involved in the competition entry. Mildred, Enid and Maud sat in the front row with a crowd of excited spectators and watched as Form 5 performed the first showing off of an act which really did express the joy of flying. "I think we could actually win with that," enthused Maud as they hurried to grab some food before lunch break was over. "It really was beautiful." "No, it wasn't," said Ethel, who had come up behind them without anyone noticing. "Just run of the mill, if you ask me." "No one is asking you, Ethel," said Mildred. "Anyway, you aren't a judge, thank goodness, so we'll just have to keep our fingers crossed and leave it up to them. Don't you want us to win the swimming pool?" "You think you're really great now, don't you, Mildred Hubble?" said Ethel, her voice rising dangerously. "Just because you've lit a few lanterns without burning the school down, you think everyone's suddenly dying to hear what you think about everything." "No, I don't, Ethel," said Mildred wearily. "And I'm not getting into an argument about nothing, so why don't you find someone else to pick on?" Ethel stalked away down the corridor, and Mildred felt a sudden stab of alarm as she imagined what Ethel would do if she found out about Star. Chapter 17. The competition was to take place at the Supreme Magician's residence, a vast rambling castle with 150 rooms, one of which was a gigantic hall, large enough for 3 schools to fit in at once, cheering on their acts in the front of the 3 judges. There were 30 schools for sorcery, magic and witchcraft scattered about the country, most of them flying in from isolated places, and it would take 10 days for all 30 acts to be judged at the rate of 3 a day, 5 days a week. Miss Cackle's Academy was to perform on the last day of the competition, along with Pentangles and Moonridge High. By a fantastic stroke of luck, Miss Cackle's Academy was only 3 mountains away from the Supreme Magician's castle, which meant they would not have to stay overnight. Mildred had been racking her brains for a furtive way of bringing Star with her under the watchful eye of Miss Drill, who was unfortunately proving every bit as vigilant as Miss Hardbroom, despite the zany outfits. And Mildred breathed a sigh of relief that she would only be gone for the daytime hours, when Star was usually having his long sleeps under her bed anyway. Miss Cackle and Miss Hardbroom sat in the staff room with all the teachers on the night before the school's auditions. "I think that's everything covered, Miss Cackle," said Miss Hardbroom, who had just read out their travel plans in minute detail, including the transport of costumes and scenery, plus the making of nearly 200 pat lunches. "Do you think we might actually win?" asked Miss Drill. "I've seen one of the rehearsals, and I must say they did look quite special." "I think we have an excellent chance," replied Miss Hardbroom. "My only worry is there might have been an overabundance of broomstick ballets during the previous 9 days. If so, the judges might be a little bit bored by yet another ballet routine. I must say, I rather wish we weren't the very last act of all." "Oh, I don't know, Miss Hardbroom," said Miss Cackle. "Surely it's worse to be at the beginning nearly 2 weeks earlier. The judges are much more likely to remember the last act than the first one." "And the judges are all getting on for 100 years," laughed Miss Mould. "So it's better to be fresh in their memories, I'd say." Now, Miss Mould," scolded Miss Cackle, a twinkle in her eye. "We're none of us getting any younger. And I'm sure that the combined brains of the 3 most honoured sorcerers in the country are quite adequate to judge a talent competition." "Well, if you don't mind," announced Miss Hardbroom, "I'm off to bed, as there will be a great deal to contend with tomorrow morning. One last thing, Miss Mould. Could you assist me with taking the costumes down to the front hall, ready for Form 5 to tie on their broomsticks in the morning? I shall be carrying the rolled-up backdrop underneath my own broom for the journey, as it is really rather unwieldy, and we don't want any accidents before we get there. All pupils will be assembled in the playground by 10 o'clock sharp, ready for take-off. Well, good night, everyone." "Oh, good night, Miss Hardbroom," called Miss Cackle, as Miss Hardbroom swept out of the door. She was going to say pleasant dreams, but somehow she couldn't imagine her deputy dreaming of anything but school rules and timetables, so there didn't seem much point. The following morning, Mildred was up and dressed even earlier than usual, ready to zoom around the corridors, take Star for his walk, and hurry back to hide him under her bed before the journey. She put down a bowl of cat food for Tabby, left the door ajar so that he could go for his morning wander, stuffed Star into the hodel, and set off down the corridor. She was now an expert lantern monitor, taking her duties extremely seriously. She had changed all the candles the day before and polished the glass, so that there was no maintenance to do that morning, and she was making very good time. She soon reached the entrance hall and flew up to douse the candle in the large lantern which hung above the main doors leading to the playground. It was a cheerful, sunny morning, most unusual for the academy. Mildred glanced around at the rays slanting in through the windows and noticed the rail with the 4 ballet costumes awaiting broom transport. Star was already wiggling about in the bag, keen to have his breakfast on the grass and run about through the trees. "Stop it," giggled Mildred. "You'll have me off the broom." "Talking to yourself now, are you, Mildred Hubble?" said a sharp voice right behind her. Mildred jumped and almost overbalanced, as she was now 15 feet up and not expecting anyone to be there. "Ethel!" she exclaimed. "Careful! You made me jump! What are you doing here?" "Following you," said Ethel unpleasantly, hovering next to Mildred and nudging the hodel with her foot. "You weren't quite quick enough outside the gates yesterday. I was looking out of the window when the mist cleared, just in time to see you putting something in your bag. What was it, Mildred? A badger? A large hedgehog? It was definitely an animal, that's for sure." "It was only Tabby," said Mildred, feeling desperate as the hodel was now noticeably beginning to judder. "He's in there now, so I'd better get on, Ethel, if you don't mind, or we'll both be late for take-off." Unfortunately, just at that moment, Tabby, unmistakable as he was the only tabby cat in the school, strolled underneath them and out into the yard through the communal cat flap set into the wall. "I think not," said Ethel. "So, what have you got in the bag, Mildred? Come on, show me." Mildred had flipped open the lantern door and was poised with the candle snuffer when Ethel made a dive for the zip on the hodel. Chapter 18. Everything happened at once. Ethel yanked the zip open and Star's head sprang into view, barking. Ethel was thrown off balance and seized Mildred, who also overbalanced. Mildred tried to stop them all from falling by grabbing the lantern, but to her horror, she only succeeded in wrenching it clean off the wall. They watched helplessly as it hurtled across the slate floor below, smashing open and setting light to the costumes. Dangling from both brooms, Ethel gripping Mildred's hodel and Mildred hanging on to Star, they twirled down together like a helicopter with a broken rotor, fortunately cushioned by Ethel's hodel as they hit the flagstones. "Quick, Ethel!" yelled Mildred, jumping up and rummaging in her hodel. "Grab your fire extinguishers!" Star was bouncing up and down, barking hysterically, but the only thing Mildred could think of was putting out the fire. She found her own fire extinguisher, stood back and aimed it at the base of the flames, which were roaring up all 4 costumes with a heart-stopping speed. Ethel lay frozen with shock on the top of the hodel where she had fallen, watching the clouds of foam envelop the burning mass of clothing. "Ethel!" bellowed Mildred, still frantically spraying foam up and down the flames. "Do something! Get your fire extinguisher now!" Ethel snapped out of her trance. She scrambled to her feet, pulled her fire extinguisher out of the bag and aimed it at the remaining shreds of the costumes until the flames were completely engulfed. The hallway was now a blackened mess, knee-deep in foam, with bits of charred material floating delicately through the air. Mildred aimed one last burst of foam into the broken lantern. "Oh, it's okay, Ethel," she said. "It's out." Star had stopped barking and tucked himself behind Mildred's legs, looking shamefaced. Something was clearly wrong, and he was really rather worried that it might be his fault. Mildred and Ethel stood staring at each other in a state of shock. They were both covered in soot, their clothes drenched, the ballet costumes utterly ruined. "We're going to get into such trouble," murmured Mildred, glancing nervously towards the door.
"You certainly are, Mildred Hubble," said Miss Hardbroom's unwelcome voice as she materialised silently from the dark alcove. "This is quite unbelievable. You do realise that we now have absolutely no prospect of even entering the competition, let alone winning it. Added to which, the two of you have almost burnt down the school."
"It was an accident, Miss Hardbroom," said Ethel, beginning to sob. "Mildred had a dog in her bag, and I was investigating." "It wasn't my fault," protested Mildred. "I was on my morning lantern round, minding my own business, when Ethel flew up behind me and grabbed my bag, and—" "I didn't just grab it," said Ethel. "I was trying to stop you from hiding that dog."
Miss Hardbroom brushed a floating piece of charred owl costume from her nose as they all looked down at Star, now cowering behind Mildred. "Go to Miss Cackle's office," said Miss Hardbroom, in a voice quivering with anger, "and wait for me there while I attend to this mess. Then we will need to gather everyone together in the great hall, where you can both explain to your fellow pupils why all their hard work has been in vain. I'll take the dog, Mildred," she added, as the two girls turned to leave the scene of their crime, followed closely by Star.
"He needs to go out, Miss Hardbroom," gibbered Mildred. "Couldn't I just—"
"No, you couldn't," snapped Miss Hardbroom. "I'll take him out if he needs to go out, Mildred. He's no longer any concern of yours. Give me your sash so that I can use it as a lead."
Mildred took off her sash and knelt down to tie it around Star's neck. "Do as you're told, won't you?" she said in a quavering voice as he tried to jump up and lick her face. "Be a good dog. He's called Star, Miss Hardbroom."
She handed the makeshift lead to the terrifying teacher, but to Mildred's surprise, the little dog didn't struggle at all. He just sat down, stuck his nose in the air, and began to howl mournfully, as if he knew that all was lost.